You're going to hurt yourself climbing up there. Written by Kitty Cat on AO3. Read by its_Kingston. Summary. After Team RWBy gets separated to focus on their weak points, everyone is tired. Especially RWBy, who had to stay later than the others. But when Weiss isn't in the dorm afterwards, RWBy needs to make sure Weiss is okay. Even if that means trekking to the library to find and talk to her. Which somehow leads to her cuddled up beside Weiss on her bunk. RWBy bounced on her heels, humming to herself. Their team had been separated for training lessons, and RWBy had been the first one done with her lessons, which she suspected had been made to cater against them because why had she ended up in a game of chess with Professor Ozpin? Judging by the haggard state of the few people outside of her team who were in the waiting area, she was probably one of the few who didn't fight. Jean looked in especially rough shape. "Hey, Jean," she yelled, going to meet up with him on the couch. Someone grabbed her shoulder and she paused, staring straight up. Pyrrha looked down at her before she stepped around RWBy. "Let me speak to him. Lai and Nora are still not back yet." Pyrrha didn't look too bruised up, but her hair was wet, pulled up in a bun instead of her usual ponytail. "Oh, yeah, of course," RWBy said cheerfully, and Pyrrha nodded her thanks before walking to Jean's side. Waiting, yes," RWBy said, popping her lips as she walked back to the entrance. She could wait. Of course she could. Even if she wanted to ask everyone else if they had played chess with the teacher too. Because who even does that when they're training to be a fighter? Hunters, heroes. Surely they could have at least had her face off against one Graham. Weiss still had the upper hand on her since she had killed that boar Graham in class. She groaned, knocking her head back against the wall before she collapsed down it. Her cape slid up behind her until she hit the floor, and the cape fell over her face. "Bleh," she muttered, pushing out of her face. "RWBy! Hi!" Nora yelled, bouncing in through the entrance. "Did you have fun playing games?" RWBy grinned, jumping to her feet quickly. "Did they make you play chess too?" Nora shook her head quickly. "Nope, some weird memory game they gave up on because I kept forgetting what we were doing. I have to come back for more training tonight." She pouted slightly before perking up and spinning on her heel. "Can we keep it down?" I asked, tapping Nora on the shoulder. Rather not disturb everyone who just fought. Nora's eyebrows twisted in confusion, but before RWBy could explain her theory that they were all different on purpose, Lai had already dragged her away towards Pyrrha and Jean. Pyrrha was now fussing over Jean's hair, not even sparing a glance towards Lai and Nora. How had none of her team come back yet? This was killing her. She dropped back down to the floor, making sure the cape didn't cover her face this time. "Waiting. Right," she muttered, pulling her legs up. She tapped her feet against the floor, keeping them in time to the music in her head. After a few moments she dropped them again, sinking down against the wall with a loud groan until her neck was at an odd angle. She tapped her feet together, focused on them. "Hey," someone yelled, kicking her legs. "Weiss!" RWBy yelled, jumping to her feet quickly. "How did it go?" Weiss scoffed, placing her hands on her hips. "Better, if you weren't trying to trip people up in the doorway," she said simply. "But it went fine," she shrugged, moving away from the door. RWBy bounded over with her, tapping her heels against the floor as she moved. "What'd they have you do?" "Dodging," she said with a shrug. RWBy bounded in front of her, walking backwards. Her knees were scraped up and her battle skirt was a bit dirty, but Jean had looked worse. Against elementary schoolers, Weiss finished, quieter than before. RWBy's brows pinched and she tipped her head to the side. "Huh?" "Nothing," Weiss said dismissively, waving her hand. "Where's the other two?" RWBy gasped, bouncing slightly as her back hit something. She grinned, looking up. "Hi, Yang." "Hey, RWBy," Yang said, resting her chin on RWBy's head. "Elementary schoolers. How'd they end up beating you?" she teased, and RWBy could feel her grin. Weiss gasped slightly, shaking her head. "They didn't beat me. What did they put you up against?" she asked, confirming RWBy's suspicion that they had all gotten a different activity. She wasn't sure if everyone just knew that and she was late to the party, or if Weiss had figured it out. She was smart. "They didn't put me through any training," Yang groaned, every word knocking her chin against RWBy's head. "They made me watch a study video about why I can't go throwing myself headfirst into battles," she whined, wrapping her arms around RWBy's neck. RWBy made a choking sound, and Yang quickly stepped back. "Gotcha!" RWBy yelled, and Yang's concerned expression shifted to mock rage. "Why, you little..." she teased, reaching for Ruby. Hi guys, Blake interrupted, walking towards the group. Yang immediately disconnected from Ruby, going to sling an arm over Blake's shoulders instead. Hey kitty, she yelled, leaning against Blake with a grin. What'd they put you up against? Blake sighed, but didn't push her off. Don't call me that, she said, though there wasn't any anger in it. They didn't put me up against anything. They just let me read. She held up a book she had, snatching it back when Yang tried to take it. Weiss scoffed. What, do they think you're all perfect and don't need any training? She asked, shifting forward. What? Blake asked, annoyance tipping her voice. No one said that, princess. Why are you so jealous of me? She matched Weiss's position, leaning forward towards her. Whoa, Ruby said, quickly stepping between them as Yang gently pulled Blake back. Weiss huffed, taking a step forward, but Ruby didn't move. Calm down, Weiss. Blake didn't do anything. So you're on her side? Weiss snapped, inches from Ruby's face. Ruby shook her head quickly. I never said that. I just think that... Weiss interrupted her. Who cares what you think? You're only here because your uncle is... Mind if I step in? Another voice asked. Quiet, yet it stopped Weiss. Professor Ozpin stepped into the room, a small smile on his face. Weiss took 2 steps away from the door, and Ruby sighed slightly. Sorry for the secrecy around our training today. We thought it might be better for you all to practice on strengthening your weak points. He addressed the entire room, but Ruby caught his eyes, his smile growing before he looked away. Professor Goodwitch stepped up. Now, I know we all must be tired, so I suggest taking a nice long bath before turning in for the night. Classes are still proceeding as always in the morning. She tapped her crop against her hand in a repetitive motion, nodding as she spoke. We do ask the team leads stay back so we might better discuss both yours and your team's abilities. Professor Ozpin nodded. Yes, the rest of you may go now. The dining hall will only be open for a limited time, so please, make haste. He gestured towards the door, his grin not fading as people grumbled and stood to leave. Ruby glanced over to Yang and Blake, who were mere inches apart, whispering something under their breath. Blake's bow was secured on her head, covering the ears that only Team Ruby knew about. Ruby had tried to make Blake feel better about not hiding it, but she knew so little about Faunus. The books in the school library were helping, when she could sit through one long enough to understand any of the information. Yang knocked her forehead against Blake's gently, in a manner she had once done for Ruby. Come on, let's go see if we can get some tuna, she said before glancing at Ruby, draping an arm over Blake's shoulder. Good luck, sis! She waved a hand, and Ruby waved back as they left. Pyrrha and her team had left John, who was still sitting on the couch. Maybe Ruby could talk to him a bit before... Suck up, someone muttered behind her, and she flipped on her heel, surprised to see Weiss standing there. Are you okay? Ruby asked, before she'd even think about it. You seem off. I mean, I know you've had problems with Blake, and you're trying to change, but I mean, it's just... Weiss scoffed. Don't try and tell me what I am. I'm not off, today, or any day. She moved past Ruby, shoulder-checking her as she headed for the exit at the end of the group. Professor Ozpin stepped back to let her pass, his eyes trailing over to meet Ruby's in a silent question. Ruby hummed to herself, bouncing on her heels as she watched the doors close behind Weiss. She'd talk to her tonight before they went to bed. Ruby groaned, using the wall to support her as she tried to stifle back another yawn. No one's here to see it, you know, John whispered before it was broken with a large yawn of his own. I forget how many of us there are until something like that. Ruby hummed in agreement, too tired to do much else. They had won over every single person, not only their own team, but all teams. One by one. She had never been this tired from doing practically anything before. Chess and listening, so much listening, and the videos with the flashing lights and the recordings of her team getting beat down. Despite what Yang had said, apparently after the video, they had put her through a simulation to prove she didn't have to sacrifice herself for others. It had been painful for Ruby to watch. Her sister just couldn't resist running in again and again to protect wood cutouts of their team. Not just their team, random people in the cutouts. She even tried to use her body to shield Professor Ozpin from a grim. Weiss had... she'd been beaten by elementary schoolers. Namely, elementary schoolers with what looked like miniguns and small water beads. That and large bouncy balls and tennis balls, whatever the children could get. Weiss kept trying to wait for her openings, for her turn, and she couldn't see that the children were too unpredictable for that. It had only ended when Professor Goodwitch had declared it over. Even then, a kid got another hit in. Blake didn't have a video, which Ruby was grateful for. It was one thing for her to watch them, but another for every team lead to watch her team fail. She had been instructed to give Blake homework and teamwork and trust, which hurt her head to even think about how she'd do it. Blake wasn't a trusting person still, and she tried and tried and... Ruby? Jean asked, waving a hand in front of her face. You in there? Ruby perked up, turning to nod at him quickly. Yep, right here, sirro, she said loudly, saluting dramatically. He chuckled slightly, nodding. Well, good night, he finally said, turning into his dorm room. Ruby watched as it shut before she finally realized that meant hers was right behind her. Night, she mumbled, to no one in particular, gently opening her door. She paused when she realized the lower bunk had a light on. Blake? She asked, and Blake glanced up. Oh, Ruby, she said, and Yang sat up from where she was lying beside Blake. I wasn't sure how long you would be. Ruby nodded, glancing over towards the other bed. She said she wanted to go to the library, Yang said softly. I was going to follow her, but, well, you know Weiss. She shrugged, leaning forward to rest her cheek on Blake's shoulder. Ruby sighed, biting her cheek. Yeah, I do, I guess. She nodded to convince herself. Hey, Blake, I want to say that I'm sorry about... No need, Blake said with a small chuckle. Her cat ears twitched, and it was only then that Ruby realized they weren't wrapped up. Yang calmed me down. Weiss just... She has a way of getting to me. Yang nodded, yawning slightly. She'll probably be back soon. We'll leave a lamp on for her. Her eyes shut as she talked, leaning more into Blake. Ruby hesitated before she shook her head. I'm just gonna go find her real quick. I'll be back. She left before Yang could argue, shutting the door to their dorm room gently. The library, that was on the other side of the building. Luckily still attached, though. Yay, Ruby said weakly as she headed for the stairs. Weiss? Ruby whispered, searching through the library slowly. She didn't see anyone studying, but that didn't mean they couldn't be hiding in one of the stacks. It was very late, but some people like that. Not Ruby. Where are you? She asked, a little louder. She paused when she spotted a glimpse of white hair through the books, grinning as she rushed over. Weiss, why didn't you say something? She asked, plopping down beside her teammate. Because I didn't want you to find me, she snapped, but it didn't have a lot of the anger she had in her voice earlier. Ruby shrugged it off, leaning closer to Weiss to see the book she was reading. History of Faunus, she read out loud before Weiss slammed the book shut and slid it across the small desk. I couldn't get through that one, Ruby confessed. Weiss huffed but didn't say anything else about it. Instead, she shifted on the couch bench, turning slightly to face Ruby. Look, She stopped talking, sighing as she rubbed her eyes. I'm sorry for how I acted earlier. There, that's it. Ruby stared at her for a second before she chuckled. She shifted as well to tuck her legs up onto the couch, leaning onto one of the plush arms. I mean, I'd prefer you not to talk to our teammates that way, but I can tell you're trying. She gestured towards the book. I really like you, and I like how well you work with a team. I don't know, I like you. Weiss's face went red, and she spun around so she wasn't looking at Ruby. Did I say something wrong? Ruby asked quickly, shifting to lean closer to her. I didn't mean to if I did, No, you're fine, Weiss said quickly, standing up. She went to grab the books and take a step forward before her knees buckled and she stumbled down. Ruby caught her quickly, pulling them both up to the floor in an awkward tumble. Sorry, I didn't mean to mess up and... It's okay, Ruby said with a chuckle, rubbing her head. She sat up, blinking slowly as she looked at Weiss under her. Oh, sorry, she yelled, scrambling to get to her feet. Weiss coughed into the crook of her arm, her face still bright red for some reason. I pulled you down. I'm the one who messed up, Weiss managed to say, though it was more a whisper. Ruby chuckled, shaking her head. She held a hand out, and Weiss studied it for a moment before she took it. It wasn't a mess-up, just a stumble. We all got those. I mean, the whole explosion thing on the first day. She let go of Weiss's hand after she pulled her up, waving her arms around wildly. Weiss chuckled softly, nodding. That was pretty bad. You need to study up on dust in its form still. That could have been worse. She went to take another step forward, and she stumbled again. This time she fell against Ruby's chest, who was able to hold her up with a bit of effort. Are you okay? Falling like this isn't like you. Weiss tucked her left leg behind her other, nodding. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just tired. RWBy spun them around each other, dropping Weiss onto the couch. She dropped to the floor, grabbing Weiss's ankle before she could protest. Did you twist it in class? She asked, holding it gently. Weiss was in her slippers, so it was easy to see the bright red area around her ankle. She gently touched it, and Weiss hissed, yanking it out of RWBy's grip. I said I'm fine. I don't need you or my dad breathing down my neck about... Your dad? RWBy asked, glancing up. The big boss man? Weiss's lips pressed together in a thin line. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. RWBy's brows furrowed, and she shook her head slowly. You're not. So stop saying that, she demanded, standing up before she plopped down right next to Weiss. Now their spots had switched. Weiss had no way to pull herself away from RWBy. You have an injury. Your bags under your eyes are bigger, and your stomach hasn't quieted this whole time. That's not fine. That's bad. She got louder on the last word before she pulled it back with a small breath. That's fine. It's fine. You can't be fine all the time, princess. Weiss chuckled, crossing her arms over her chest. I hate it when Blake calls me that, she said, and RWBy went to take it back before she added. You say it differently. RWBy grinned and went to speak again before a yawn escaped her, and she quickly threw a hand over her mouth. I'm so sorry. This is interesting, and I'm not bored, I promise. I'm just really tired, and Yeah, Weiss agreed softly. She rolled her ankle in the air slightly, and RWBy watched her wince in pain. It is late. Do you think Blake is asleep? She turned to look back at RWBy, and her hair caught in the moonlight streaming in through the nearest window. What was it John had called her on that first day? Snow angel? That didn't seem like the right word to describe her. The way her face was usually skillfully controlled, or the way that the corners of her mouth turned down when someone said something wrong. The slight tick in her eyebrows, and the glint in her eye when someone gave her a chance at fencing or stuff she knew. Maybe a snowflake? Instead of being made from children lying in the snow, a snowflake is made by the sky, where you don't know what it'll look like till it's in front of you, and when you see it, it shines, like the way her eyes seemed to sparkle in the moonlight as she looked at RWBy. Can we stay here? RWBy asked before she could actually think about it. Weiss stared at her to continue, and she quickly fumbled, turning away from the eyes to rummage through papers. I have some work I want to do, she decided before inwardly cursing the thought. Weiss nodded, shifting so her bad ankle was propped up on her other knee. RWBy wanted to bring it up again, but Weiss hadn't wanted to mention it. Sure, I guess. She's probably still awake anyway. RWBy nodded without another thought, her heart hammering in her ears as she leaned forward and dragged the book about fondness to them. Thanks, was all she could think to mutter as she opened it. She felt Weiss beside her, reading along with the words. RWBy couldn't focus on a single one of them as Weiss's quiet mumbling sent shivers down her spine. The small nod Weiss did after she finished the pages was the only thing RWBy had to go by on flipping them. Until Weiss reached up to turn the book slightly, her hand pressed up against RWBy's as her shoulders brushed. RWBy had died. That was it. She had died, and this is what heaven looked like. Or hell, considering the torture that this was. Yeah, hell made more sense. The floor had opened wide and swallowed her into this delusion. She paused when she realized she had skimmed the page a few times, but with no response from Weiss to turn the page. She glanced over to find her head nodding forward, her eyes fluttering open and shut. Weiss? RWBy asked, and Weiss's eyes flew open as she turned to look at RWBy. I'm awake, she muttered, leaning back. Promise. RWBy chuckled, closing the book softly. Come on, let's get back to the dorm room. Don't want to fall asleep out here, she joked, laughing slightly. Weiss glared at her before blinking slowly, each blink taking more aggression out of her face and replacing it with exhaustion. I'm not tired, she argued, but didn't protest when RWBy stood up and helped her up. RWBy left the books where they lie, knowing she'd be back for them tomorrow anyway, when she actually had the brain power to read, which might actually be never. Weiss stumbled slightly as she tried to step onto the hurt ankle, and RWBy immediately ducked under the taller girl's arms, standing up so Weiss was forced to lean on her. She went to argue, but before she could finish, RWBy tucked an arm around her back, bending her knees just slightly to put the other arm under Weiss's knees. And up, she yelled, scooping Weiss into the air. Weiss shouted in surprise, wrapping her arms tightly around RWBy's neck. Put me down this instant, she yelled, sounding much more awake than a few seconds ago. I'm too heavy for you. RWBy bounced her gently to prove she wasn't too heavy as she headed for the dorms. Crescent Rose is pretty heavy, and I swing her around no issue, RWBy explained, trying to keep energy in her voice. In reality, she was tired. Very tired. But showing that could mean losing her grip on Weiss, and she wouldn't do that. For any of her team, of course. She couldn't let any of them fall. I still don't like this, she mumbled, her grip still tight on Ruby's neck as she practically held herself up. I'm not some stupid sword for you to throw around. Ruby hummed, shaking her head as she fought to keep her focus on each next step. You're more important to me, she agreed, biting back another yawn. Weiss didn't say anything in return, and Ruby could feel her head fall against Ruby's chest. Ruby kept her eyes forward. She had to keep her eyes forward, and not down at the snowflake in her arms that was trusting her, and oh God, why had she picked up Weiss? That was a very good way to get a mutant aster through your chest. She finally made it back to her room, each step as she neared harder than the last. Her arms were tired, and her feet were tired, and her brain hurt. The fact that Weiss had fallen asleep didn't help much with carrying her back, but Ruby wasn't going to let her go or wake her up. She needed the sleep, and Ruby would carry her for it. She shifted as she neared, lifting her foot in an odd balancing act before she managed to jimmy the door handle down and open the door. The lights were off now, and she slowly stepped in, trying her best not to trip over her feet in the darkness. You need to let go, Ruby mumbled, trying to pry Weiss's fingers from around her neck with little luck. She finally managed to, dropping Weiss down harder than Ruby had meant. Sorry, she apologized quickly, and Weiss groaned, not opening her eyes. She went to move away before she paused, the moonlight catching on the gems in Weiss's hair accessory. She gently lifted Weiss's head, doing her best to wind the tiara out without catching on any of her hair. She knelt down to do so, running her fingers through Weiss's soft hair. She managed to free the tiara, sighing as she set it to the windowsill. She shrugged off her cape and shoes, going to move to her bed before Weiss's hand grabbed her wrist. Ruby looked down at her, and Weiss's eyes were open, matching Ruby's. You're going to hurt yourself climbing up there, she whispered, her words muddled with sleep. I have room. Ruby tried to argue, but Weiss pulled her wrist slightly, and Ruby didn't fight it. She stumbled forward, doing her best not to knee Weiss in the chest as she landed on the bed beside her. Are you sure? She asked, but Weiss had already rolled over, taking only part of the blanket with her. Ruby curled under the remainder, doing her best not to touch Weiss's back with hers. She smiled, pushing her face into the soft and very comfy duvet. She glanced up, jumping slightly as she saw Yang grinning at her. In Blake's bed, Blake's arm was draped over her chest, her face hidden behind Yang. I know what you are, Yang mouthed, and Ruby rolled her eyes before she turned to face the other way. Weiss was closer than she had thought, but the bed wasn't made for two. Still, Weiss had pulled her down, so it had to be okay. And her brain hurt. She was done overthinking, first night anyway. Good night, she mumbled, half for Weiss and half for Yang. She would worry about spending the night with the snowflake in the morning when her brain could process it. For the second time since Weiss had arrived at Beacon, she woke to Ruby draped across her and a flash of a camera going off nearby. Endnotes. Well, here is more White Rose. They are disasters. Could technically be a continuation of my other RWBy fic, I guess. That was You're Going to Hurt Yourself Climbing Up There, written by Kitty Cat on AO3, read by its_Kingston. I think that's everything. Goodbye.